Yamunatiravanachari Jai. Santa Gopti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Virayat Srimad Sakata Krishna Punyashravana Kirtanam Vidyantasto Yabhadrani Vidunati Saritsatam Mastaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavat Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhagavati Naishtaki. So today's class was supposed to be given by my husband Shashakar Prabhu. He last minute was not feeling very well. By your prayers, he'll feel better hopefully soon. So I'm just filling in. Hopefully I can say something on his behalf. So today we're reading from Canto 6 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And we are on chapter number 18, and Targa Prabhu has it on the chat. Chapter 18, text number, chapter 18, text number, let me find it, one second. I believe it's 40.
44 and 45.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. 44 and 45. So I'll read the Sanskrit first on 44, and then we can do 45 together. Iti sanchintya bhagavan maricha karunandana uvacha kinchit kupita atmanam cha vikarhayan. So the translation, Sri Sukadev Goswami said, Kasyapa Muni, thinking in this way, became somewhat angry, condemning himself, O Maharaj Parikshit, descendant of Kuru. He spoke to Diti as follows. So text 45. Shri Kashyapa Uvacha Putraste Bhavita Bhadre Indra Hadeva Bandava Samvatsarang Vritam Idam Yadyanjo Darayishyasi. Prabhus? It's good. Putras is text 45. Yeah, that's okay. Shri Kashyapa Uvacha. Shri Kashyapa Uvacha. Putrasya Bhaviti Bhadre. putraste bhavita badre. Indraha deva bandhava samvatsaram vratam midam yadyanjo dharayishyasi. Anybody else?
Kashyapa uvacha.
Sri Kashyapa uvacha.
Putraste babita patre.
Bhavita badre.
Indraha deva bandavaha.
Indraha deva bandhavaha
Samvatsaram vratam idam.
samvatsaram vratamidam
Yad yanjo dari. Yash. Yadyanjo dara yasi.
yadyanjo darayishyasi. So we'll do word for word. Sri Kashyapa uvacha. Kashyapa Muni said, Putra, son, te, your, Bhavita will be, Badre, O gentle woman, Indraha, killer of Indra, or follower of Indra, Adeva Bandhava, friend of the demons, or Deva Bandhava, friend of the demigods, Samvatsaram, for a year, but Vratam, vow, Idam, this, Yadi, if, Anja, properly, Darayishyasi, you will execute. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Kasyapa Muni said, my dear, gentle wife, if you follow my instructions regarding this vow for at least 1 year, you will surely get a son who will be able to kill Indra. However, if you deviate from this vow of following the Vaishnava principles, you will get a son who will be favorable to Indra. Purport. The word Indraha refers to an asura who is always eager to kill Indra. An enemy of Indra is naturally a friend to the asuras, but the word Indraha also refers to one who follows Indra or who is obedient to him. When one becomes a devotee of Indra, he is certainly a friend to the demigods. Thus the words Indraha Deva Bandhava are equivocal, for they say, your son will kill Indra, but he will be friendly to the demigods. If a person actually became a friend of the demigods, he certainly would not be able to kill Indra. So, welcome everybody in class and online. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. My respects and obeisances to all assembled devotees. So here we are in the midst of, towards the end of this Canto 6. These are all the descriptions of the prescribed duties for mankind. So we're getting a lot of insight, and I'm very grateful for the classes that all the devotees have been sharing their insight on. This particular continuation is part of the pastime where deity is of course, upset that her sons were killed by Lord Vishnu. Well, she's thinking because of Indra that they were killed, that it's his fault, and that he, for different reasons, she feels justified in her decision to kill him or to try to kill him. And then, actually, if we forward a little before her, in the beginning of this part of this canto, there's a part where Maharaj Parikshit is inquiring from Shukadev Goswami as to how is it that the Maruts, who supposedly they have demoniac mentality by nature, how is it that Indra puts them in the position of a demigod or demigods? Um, and so then, of course, Maharaj Parikshit is wondering, he says, myself and all the sages are wondering, how is this possible? Um, and so there's many descriptions of the progenitors and their progeny and their different descendants, and we came to the point of Diti and her relationship with Kashyapa Muni and her desire. So there were a few points within this purport that are pretty relevant to show that there's a term that Kashyapa Muni uses that can refer to the so-called son that she's requesting for to either be considered a enemy to Indra, or can also be friend or favorable to Indra. And Prabhupada's making the point that actually, if you become a friend of the demigods, you can't kill them. You wouldn't kill them. So this is Kasyapa's Muni's ingenious way of instructing his wife in her earnest desire. And he's instructing in such a way that he's still expressing a merciful attitude towards her, but he is using his devotional intelligence to somehow engage her according to her position of understanding. Um, so I looked up references for a few really good speakers on this particular verse and text because I really needed guidance. One thing in my heart immediately that came to mind was chapter 10 of Bhagavad Gita, in referencing what was my initial realization that everything spiritual material is coming from Krishna. Because I'm trying to think in my mind how to relate the various levels of instruction back to a common source. And I was still a little bit confused how to connect that in relationship to this particular verse. So then I was outsourcing to see what are some nice references. So I was hearing a nice class from Urmila Mataji, and she made some good points. And then I was also looking up different places where the Maruts are mentioned, because ultimately the child within the womb of Diti, due to one of her mistakes, here Kashyapa Muni is saying, if you make a mistake in any of these execution, then you know the son will be favorable to Indra. And so of course Indra got word that she's performing these activities, so then Indra finds a way. He's watching her every move, and as soon as she slips up even just a little bit, he takes that opportunity to enter her womb and chop that body into, I think it's 49 pieces, if I'm not mistaken. Well, he chops up the little pieces into many pieces, and these then become the Maruts, or the different demigods of wind, particularly to the wind. Of course, they're born of DT, but then later on, as we'll hear, they get instated by Lord Indra as demigods, according to their mentality, which is actually favorable to Indra. They become favorable. And this is by the grace of the instruction of Kashyapa Muni, because Kashyapa Muni is a devotee. And so there's one lesson, which is, excuse me, there's one lesson, which is that of, first of all, going back to just the um, material side, or you could say the Varnashram side, which is the aspect of marriage. Um, in this case, of course, you can see the relationship is similar to like someone having a position of instructing spiritual master or guru to disciple. In this particular case, it's marriage. And so I was just thinking that this is a good example of discontent within a relationship. So, you know, Mataji is unhappy. So she requests something from her husband. And of course, we heard the different psychologies of how she was able to manage to pull out favor from her husband. And he became a little bit perturbed and a little angry when he found out what really she was desiring. And so, like this, sometimes we find ourselves in that situation in our relationships where we may not totally agree with each other. But the purpose of the marriage in Krishna consciousness is that, you know, there tends to be one person that's more spiritually advanced than the other, and there may be equality in the marriage as well. Um, but the point of the marriage is to help each other to remember Krishna. And so even if one falls a little weak, the other person has that opportunity rather than seeing it as unfavorable situation for their relationship, they can see it as an opportunity to help the other person in their Krishna consciousness in a way that the other person can feel encouraged and make progress. So it's not that Kasyapa Muni smashed her with a bunch of scripture and made her feel like so inferior, or even used scripture to somehow justify his anger, but he, from a merciful side, he went ahead and tried to satisfy her desire, but he did it in a way that helped her to become purified. And so this is a very nice example of how to manage in our own relationships when we find some discord or disagreement, especially when it comes to principles, higher principles of devotional service, because we're meant to grow together. So that was one point that I thought was really helpful and instructive, and to see that there's always a blessing in disguise when there's seems an apparent setback or situation that may seemingly see that we can't progress, but there's always some hidden blessing available for us. Um, so I went over kind of the background of the story, and then the other lesson is the aspect of the relationship between teacher and disciple. Of course, in this case, the teacher is Kasyapa Muni, and the position of, you know, DT, she's taking that position as a student in the sense that she's taking the guidance and instruction from her husband. Her desire is not pure, but she's taking that role. And because she's taking the proper position and following the instructions, she gets desired results. And for her desire, initially it was wrong, but through the process of following the instruction, it became purified, and she was able to actually become satisfied. So, the instruction of the spiritual master should be, of course, the spiritual master's expertise is that they know the level of the disciple or the student, and so they instruct according to the disciple's, you know, level. And the same on the same side of the disciple or the student should be satisfied with the instructions, knowing that they shouldn't preemptively request or think that they deserve to hear more um, if they're not ready for it. So, of course, the teacher is always hoping that they can share more with their student, but they won't because that will be a disservice because um, it won't encourage one to follow the instructions if they're not able to. So then the position of the disciple is such that they have that level of trust and faith that, yes, the instruction I'm being given is according to my position, and I should follow sincerely and faithfully. So, for example, a student may have a question pertaining to their um, varnashram duties, or they may have a question pertaining to things that are not necessarily directly related to Krishna consciousness, but but maybe that's the level that they're at. So they need some guidance to help them practice to the level that they're at. And in that way, the spiritual master or the teacher has an ability to guide them in such a way that they can engage in devotional service, which is the main goal here in Srimad Bhagavatam, is pure devotional service. So then I was thinking, how in Bhagavad Gita there's chapter 12 where Krishna will give instructions to Arjuna of the different levels at which one can engage in devotional service. And by reading this chapter, we can also see our position and get a sense of hope that, yes, I may not be on the pure platform to engage 24 hours a day, 100% in Krishna consciousness and remember Krishna all the time. Um, but there are other steps that one can take, and in this way, have some inkling or some tiny bit of appreciation, not entitlement, because that's the tendency. Also, when one is given position in service, there can sometimes be a tendency towards a feeling of entitlement that I've now been given this position or this service. It could be anything, right? Prabhupada always gives that quote, and everyone, has heard it in other terms, like pauper is proud of his penny, right? So it may not even be that great in a greater context of what we're given to do, whatever type of service it is, but due to that tendency to lord over nature and feel some sense of false, prestige or false pride, then we tend to, feel some entitlement there. So there's another important lesson I thought that was kind of interwoven with this understanding of, where we're at, and as also in terms of giving instruction to others, is having this important positive side of developing some sense of appreciation. Because I was thinking, like, what's a really good remedy, and what are some of the initial feelings that one should have to really make progress, regardless of what level we're on. And I was thinking of this famous quote that I heard Prabhupada say, where he mentioned about, especially in regards to chapter 10 and 11, because chapter 10 is the opulence of the Absolute, and then chapter 11 is the universal form. So there he's saying that um, having some connection to Krishna and appreciation is the beginning steps of devotion. So for someone who whose faith is not yet strong enough um, to directly engage in devotional service or even in chanting the holy names, in the association of devotees. There's different ways we can see the Lord present, even to the limited material mind and senses with which we've been given. And so there we have the chapter 10. And in that beginning section, Krishna is really giving knowledge of himself, that he is that source, that any great things in this world, we can connect it back to seeing it's Krishna. Of course, it's the material form that's temporary, but in the sense of Krishna showing us that all those things are coming from him. So ultimately, it's a part of Krishna. So in that way, one can make that connection. So that even in chapter 10:21, there was that reference to the Maruts. Krishna saying, "Of the Maruts, I am Marichi." So he's quoting of the demigods, I am Indra, like this. And then he goes on to say in chapter 11, this universal form, which is an aspect of himself as a complete whole of all forms and all manifestations are actually within him, which is it's very scary actually. And so when Arjuna saw that form on the battlefield, Prabhupada's describing that it's only by Krishna's special empowerment that different individuals were able to see this particular universal form. And some of those entities were the Maruts, were one of them that were able to see this universal form. And it's not just everyone saw it, and those that did see it, they all became horrified. Um, and so Arjuna was saying, in the same way that all these other demigods and personalities are terrified of this universal display, I'm also afraid. So please let me again see your two-armed form as Shyamasundar holding the flute and the peacock feather like that. So it's a nice flow of finding a way to appreciate the Lord in different respects. And also, Prabhupada teaches us that not only appreciating the Lord's, manifestation within this material creation, but also appreciating the Lord himself, um, appreciating his position is one of the beginning steps into bhakti. And therefore, a lot of the first part of Srimad Bhagavatam is dealing with Krishna in his incarnations, which is very important to understand and appreciate. And then there's also, Prabhupada says, there's the appreciation of devotees. And there's a quote that Prabhupada says, um, he's saying, simply by appreciating the Vaishnavas, you can go back home, back to Godhead. Just by appreciating the Vaishnavas, which that's in and of itself, I mean, what, I don't know how much more blessings that can be, you know. And then there's also the aspect of appreciation of the Lord favorably, um, is it begins with appreciating the Lord's qualities and his position. And so this appreciation, it can lead to a desire for a deeper connection with the divine. And I got that off of the AI from Google. So AI does have a good role when it's used properly, because it takes a lot of information from proper resources. Of course, we do have to be careful. But within the context, It's a very powerful tool. So one thing for sure is coming back to a practical level as a practicing devotee who has some appreciating Srila Prabhupada. What was Prabhupada's innermost desire? And that was that we take to Krishna consciousness, that we develop our love for Krishna, and that we share it with others. And so learning the process of how to be honest and see where we're at, how to take guidance from a teacher, and also how to give guidance eventually is also part of the process. And so, in sharing Krishna consciousness with others, it's very important in knowing how much to share according to the person's ability to understand. And that takes a bit of maturity, which we can learn from our senior Vaishnav devotees, looking at their example, looking at Srila Prabhupada's example, at his spiritual master's example, and really looking for the essence. The one quality of devotee I always hear from my Guru Maharaj is Sarvagrahi. The devotee always looks for the essence. So, yes, we can have a lot of differences of opinion as to how that can be done, in what ways that can be done to share Krishna consciousness, but essentially we should look for the essence of what is being shared. And ultimately, how are people receiving that? And if they can develop some appreciation for devotees, for Krishna, then the goal is reached. The purpose of helping one is ultimately what is pleasing to the devotees and to Krishna. And the negative side, of course, in yoga, there's always positive side and negative side. So the negative side of sharing is when our false pride takes over in thinking that because I know more, then I have to show you how I know more than you. And that subtlety, it just completely spoils the whole purpose of trying to share Krishna consciousness with others. And so we have to be careful that that false pride doesn't take over the prerogative of trying to share something beautiful and amazing with another soul who is also on their path to serving the Lord. Um, so the tendency is that in our beginning stages, there can be, along with that false pride, it comes from this idea that we're actually more um, purified and advanced than we actually are. And so this is where we actually have to be a little more introspective and truthful with ourselves. And this is where the precaution comes that in our spiritual path, we want to take our time to go through the process and give ourselves time to actually, make that advancement and not try to rush through things. But there's also the caution to not go too slow. So that for myself personally, I can personally say I'm on the side of going too slow. I should be making more progress. Um, so there's the caution on that side. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that it can be detriment to one's services if one goes too slow, and if one goes too like beyond themselves too fast. Um, so it's very important that we take that time to be introspective and really see where we're at for the goal of knowing where to go next. And Mother Urmila gave a nice example how she said, like, when you're going to take a flight on an airplane, we got to choose the proper starting point to get to the right destination. Because if, say, we're trying to fly from here, you know, Gita, Nagari, Harrisburg is the closest airport, and we're trying to say go to Georgia or California or India or wherever. So we have a starting point and an ending point. But then if we book the flight to go from Hawaii to Japan, we go to the airport, it's like it's completely off. So in that sense, we have to see where is our starting point so we can actually go to the proper destination. Um, so yeah, it's 7:42, and I will stop here for to see if there's any comments or questions or um, interjections or additions from Prabhu here or anybody online.
I have one.
The Krishna Sura has one.
I'm just trying to find it. Oh, okay. Let me. Yeah, no, please.
Okay, yeah, you can use the mic. Oops.
My question is,
Uh,
you talked about the devotee always looks for the essence. That definitely stuck with me because when I took a few years, well, many years ago at
talk
this
in the
point,
mic.
when I took a trip to Cape Town, South Africa, they taught me the notion of always assume positive intent was something that stuck with me back then. And now hearing you say the devotee always looks for the essence, yeah, it seems like such an instrumental mood to carry around, but it has so many positive dominoes to like just how you navigate, how you listen, how you communicate. So yeah, that was the first time I heard that. So that's definitely really sticking. I was wondering if you just had any practical examples of how you always look for the essence, or like when does it come up? When do you have to remind yourself of that? And yeah, thanks.
Well, just a quick note. When you get a chance, you can hear this wonderful story um, about it's a it takes place in South India, and my Guru Maharaj tells this story quite often, which brings out this context of searching for the essence, like different lessons you can learn. Uh, and yeah, anyways, it's a one devotee, and I'll find it exactly and I'll send it to you. But the essence of it is one devotee was seeking instruction from his guru, and he told him, go to such and such personality and get their guidance. So I'm really not good with names and pastimes, but if anybody's curious, I can message you later when I do get the proper names. I don't want to give the wrong names of the personalities. Um, but it has to do with one of the Alwars in South India, and um, very famous pastime. And this disciple is going, and his purpose, it was quite a journey to get to this other. So his guru instructed him to go to this other teacher, right? And it was months and months and months that it took him to receive a response to his question. And the response to the question, and this is the title of the talk, is Salt, Chicken, Crane, and You. That was the response. But it was very amazing. But the idea is at the end, he was saying that, each one was giving a description of a quality of a devotee. And but just to go back to your particular question about referencing of my experience, I tend to find it in different areas, but the hardest hits me when I find that within the devotee community, there are strong differences of opinion as to what should be the priority in terms of their outreach. Um, for example, um, some people may feel like, okay, the best way to preach is by example, and then others feel that best way to preach is give out books, and others may feel the best way to preach is to raise a family, and others may feel, each individual devotee according to their training and according to their circumstance, whether they're living in a temple, outside a temple, which community they're living in, they may have a certain prerogative to um, share their Krishna consciousness in a certain way. And then, of course, you have examples like Devamrita Maharaj, who took his main form of preaching in New Zealand from the examples of Srila Prabhupada in the early days, which it's an outreach form that is not within a temple setting. And the way that it's done, not everyone is familiar with. And so I've come across in my own experience of trying to do that format of preaching and then having other devotees within the temple community feel that somehow there is some deviation because it's not directly related to deities or in the sense of like a temple environment, which in essence, the quality of what's being done and the quality of what's being given is essentially to give the holy name and prasada. But there's differences of opinions on how that should be done and why it should be done and where it should be done. And so, like this, I always remind myself that there is an aspect of seeking for the essence. So, even in getting response from devotees like that, who may not be familiar with that format of outreach, I see in myself that essentially they're doing it out of love. They're trying to follow Srila Prabhupada. They're trying to serve in the best way that they know. And so it's not my position to somehow correct them, especially if I'm in no way related to their services or, in seniority or anything like that. Um, I just take the humble position and seeing in essence what they're trying to say and how they're trying to help according to their position. Um, and also there are aspects of there are many layers that one can argue even within that point, but just sharing from my own self of how I try to seek the essence, even within disagreements within devotional community. And then on outside of devotional community, like my family, for example, with my mother, she is Catholic Christian. So in talking to her and sharing with her whatever inspires me, I try to use words that she can connect with. So, like Jesus taught a lot about being compassionate and being humble. So, in that sense, I try to relate to her what I'm doing, that I'm just trying to help others who have no, because a lot of times in the city, she would come and visit me and she'd be like, "What are you doing? Why are you going to these schools?" And, she thought that, oh, I'm missing out. I should go to school. I should get an education. I should get a job. And of course, that's natural for a mother to want the best for her children. Of course, I try to explain to her, my dear mother, so many students in school are suffering. Their minds are suffering because all their recreational activity is either intoxication or some illicit connections. And all of these are creating so much mental distress and so much disorder. They come from families that are so broken. They don't really have any spiritual base to reference themselves. And I said, it's these personalities that I'm trying to somehow help, them find some light in their life, some form of connection to God. And in this way she was able to appreciate that my intention was in the right place. Even she may not agree with all the details of the philosophy or the particular practice, um, but like that. And then there are other personalities like my grandma who would completely not want to hear any of it. So I just don't even go there. I just give her some prasadam. And I just, more share my appreciation for her for what she shared with me as far as Catholicism and teachings from Saint Thomas. She would go to this Franciscan church a lot, and she would go every day. And every day she would go in the morning. Now she has later stages of dementia, so she's not able to remember much or do much. But at least before she was very active, and so I just always share my appreciation with her, and that way I connect with her. So like these are just some of my personal examples. You're welcome. So we have about 8 minutes. If anybody else wants to share or comment or question. Let's see, we have Sachi, Yashodev, James, Jagannath Pandit, Motorola, Kiara. Yashodev says, thank you. Kumar Gopi, I'm inspired by your example of compassion and teaching. Thank you, Prabhu. We have Jasenia, Tarika Prabhu, Leela Kishore, Mataji. Any of you would like to say anything?
Thank you, Mataji, for a wonderful class. You covered a lot of important topics, and it was very nice to hear. I especially appreciating this concept of appreciating devotees, appreciating the essence. There are different terms we have from different terminology. In Chaitanya Bhagavat, there is the mention of Bhavagrahi Janardana. It's one portion of a verse from the 11th chapter of the Adi Kanda. And it means that Lord Janardana sees the sentiment of the living being, or the essence of their intentions. He sees the degree of devotion, and awards results accordingly. He does not see one's foolishness or something like that, but rather just takes the essence of one's sentiment or intention. And so one's execution of devotional service may be faulty in many ways, but in spite of that, Krishna will appreciate the attempt to render service because he's taking the essence. And similarly, the devotee has this kind of an attitude towards others. A Vaishnava is known as a dosha darshi, which means that he never sees others' faults. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is a description of Haridas Thakur, in which he is described as Vaishnavara Gunagrahi, which means that he never saw the faults in others. And this is an important qualification of a Vaishnava. If we're still seeing the faults in others, we're still in the process of becoming a Vaishnava, because a Vaishnava does not see the faults in others, but he does appreciate the good qualities. So gunagrahi means that accepting the good qualities, and never seeing any fault. It's a wonderful concept, and even more wonderful in practice, that gradually, by advancement in Krishna consciousness, without separate endeavor, a devotee acquires this attribute. It's not that one has to endeavor to become like that, or to see things in that way, but that by the practice of Krishna consciousness, by chanting Hare Krishna and following the regulative principles, rendering devotional service in various ways, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, associating with advanced devotees, that quality automatically arises. It's actually the nature of the pure soul. So it's not a question of acquiring that characteristic, but merely a question of uncovering that that quality. It's already there. It just needs to be uncovered by the practice of devotional service. So um, it's something to aspire for, and it's important because in the absence of that, there is always the jeopardy of committing offenses, and offenses can set one back um, very, very seriously. That can be extremely detrimental to one's progress in Krishna consciousness. So, to come to the point of a dosha darshi, to see only the positive and not the false, is it's a very safe position, among other things. So, absolutely something to aspire for and something to think about. The desire to achieve um, such a state of mind can um, serve as an important impetus for um, our endeavors in devotional service. Um, and it can serve as a barometer to help us to see uh, where we are situated and the degree of our progress as gradually we become less critical of others and more appreciative of them. Uh, this corresponds to our progress in Krishna consciousness. But even if we're not there, um, while on the one hand, um, such a state of mind is achieved without separate endeavor by the practice of Krishna consciousness, it's still a good idea to try to practice that sort of behavior. Um, to not dwell on the faults that we may see in others, but to practice appreciation, to try to appreciate devotees, to at least in our minds enumerate the good qualities that we see, and wherever we can find something praiseworthy, something positive, think about that, dwell on those things, and talk about those things, because by repeating, um, the understanding becomes solidified in your consciousness. So if you glorify devotees in the company of other devotees, you speak about one's good qualities, that will reinforce that appreciation in your own consciousness and also that of others. So it's a really good practice to speak positively about devotees amongst ourselves. Uh, anyway, we're up to 8 o'clock. So thank you again. Hare Krishna.
Hi, thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. That was amazing. Okay, we will end here. Have a good day, all dear devotees. Look forward to seeing you in person. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Look, that was such a nice, difficult class, right? Mm.
Jaya Lalita Vishnu Krishna Vishnu Sri Jayalalitha Krishnakalalitha Vishakasindhati Jaya Eva Sana Bandung Sri Radha Ki.